November 14th, 2019. A frail widow collapsed at the feet of a reclusive mountain man, begging him to bury her son's body that lay frozen in her cabin for 3 days. The townsfolk had already turned her away, calling her cursed, and she had nowhere left to turn. But what this stranger did next didn't just shock the entire community. It exposed a secret that would change everything they thought they knew about him. So why would a man who'd spent 15 years hiding from the world suddenly risk everything for a woman he'd never met? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The wind howled through the narrow gaps of Martha Brennan's cabin like a wounded animal seeking shelter. It was the kind of cold that didn't just bite, it devoured. The thermometer nailed to the porch post read -18 degrees, but Martha hadn't looked at it in days. She hadn't looked at much of anything except the still form, wrapped in her grandmother's quilt, on the bed in the corner. Thomas was 23 years old when the fever took him. 3 days had passed since his last labored breath, and in that time, the world had shrunk to the 4 walls of this cabin and the impossible weight of what came next. Martha pressed her weathered hands against the frost-covered window, watching the sun struggle to break through the December clouds. Coal Ridge, Colorado wasn't a large town. Barely 800 souls called it home, but it had always felt like community. The mining families looked after one another, shared what little they had, buried their dead with dignity. That's what she'd believed anyway, until she'd started knocking on doors 2 days ago. The first rejection came from Pastor Wickham at the Chapel of Eternal Grace. He'd stood in his doorway, blocking her view of the warm interior where she'd attended services every Sunday for 32 years, and told her the church cemetery was full. A lie so transparent it made her stomach turn. She'd seen them bury old man Garrison just last month in a plot 3 rows from the entrance. "There are complications with your situation, Mrs. Brennan," he'd said, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. "The board has concerns about the nature of Thomas's illness. Fever like that, it spreads. We have to think of the community." Sheriff Dale Portman had been more direct. "Your boy worked in the deep tunnels, Martha. Word is, he was stealing company equipment. The mine owner doesn't want him planted in consecrated ground, and frankly, neither do I. Some sins don't wash clean, even in death." The accusation was absurd. Thomas had been saving every penny to buy her a proper wood stove, one that didn't smoke and wheeze like the ancient iron beast that barely kept the cabin above freezing. He'd worked double shifts, came home exhausted but proud, showed her the calluses on his hands like medals of honor. Martha had tried the funeral home next. Gerald Kingston, the mortician, had actually stepped outside to meet her, closing the door behind him as if she carried plague. "I'm sorry, Martha, I truly am," he'd said, though his eyes betrayed no such sentiment. "But I can't take on any more work right now. I'm backed up for weeks. Try the mortuary over in Silverpine. That's only 30 miles east. 30 miles. She didn't own a horse anymore, couldn't afford the telegram to ask for help. And even if she could make the journey on foot, Thomas couldn't. The cold had already turned his body rigid, preserving him in a state that felt like suspended animation rather than true death. By the 3rd day, desperation had worn through the last of her pride. She'd walked to the homes of people she'd known for decades, women she'd helped deliver babies for, men whose wounds she'd bandaged after mining accidents, families she'd brought soup to when times were lean, each door opened just wide enough for excuses to slip through. "My husband says we can't get involved." "The children are scared, Martha. They heard Thomas had the dark fever. We'd help if we could, truly, but our backs are against the wall this winter." The dark fever. That's what they were calling it. A superstition born from ignorance and fear. Thomas had collapsed in the mines, struck down by what the company doctor, a drunk who spent more time at the saloon than his office, had declared was an affliction of uncertain origin. The other miners had carried him home, laid him in bed, and then scattered like leaves in a storm. Within hours, Rumors had sprouted like poisonous mushrooms. The dark fever was a curse. It marked families. It spread through entire towns, leaving ghost settlements in its wake. Never mind that Martha had spent 3 days caring for her dying son and showed no signs of illness. Never mind that Thomas's symptoms, the burning skin, the delirium, the final peaceful sleep, matched nothing in the dark fever legends. Fear didn't need facts to take root. Now Martha stood alone in her cabin, faced with an impossible choice. She couldn't leave Thomas wrapped in a quilt forever. The cold had slowed decay, but it wouldn't stop it. Spring would come, and with it consequences she couldn't bear to imagine. The mining company that employed Thomas had already sent a representative, a weasel-faced man named Curtis, who'd informed her that company housing was for active employees and their families only. She had 2 weeks to vacate or face forcible removal. 2 weeks to bury her son and somehow find a way to survive alone. Martha pulled her threadbare shawl tighter and made a decision. If the town wouldn't help her, she'd have to look beyond it. There were stories, whispers really, about a man who lived up in the high country near Widow's Peak. The locals called him the Mountain Man, though nobody seemed to know his real name. He'd appeared in Coleridge 15 years ago, bought supplies with cash, and disappeared into the wilderness. He returned every few months like clockwork, always alone, always silent, conducting his business with the efficiency of someone who'd forgotten how to make small talk. Some said he was running from the law. Others claimed he'd lost his family to illness or violence and couldn't bear civilization anymore. The more dramatic storytellers insisted he'd killed a man in a duel and taken an oath of solitude as penance. Martha had seen him only twice in all those years. Once in the general store, where he towered over everyone else, easily 6.5 feet tall, with shoulders that suggested a life of hard labor. His beard was thick and dark, shot through with premature gray, and his eyes carried the kind of depth that came from spending more time with silence than people. The second time had been more memorable. She'd been walking home from the market when a runaway cart, loaded with lumber and careening down Main Street, had nearly trampled a child. The Mountain Man had appeared from nowhere, moving with surprising speed for his size, and caught the cart with his bare hands. He'd held it until the child scrambled clear, then calmly guided it to a stop. Before anyone could thank him, he'd vanished back into the crowd. Those hands, Martha thought now, hands strong enough to stop a runaway cart, could dig a grave in frozen ground. She knew it was a desperate plan, probably foolish. The Mountain Man's cabin was a full day's hike up terrain that turned treacherous in winter. She was 54 years old, hadn't eaten a proper meal in days, and wasn't sure she had the strength for such a journey. But what choice remained? Martha packed what little she could carry, some dried meat, a canteen, matches, and the small leather pouch containing the last of her money, $43.20. She'd counted it so many times the bills had worn soft as cloth. Before leaving, she returned to Thomas's side. In the dim light filtering through ice-glazed windows, he looked peaceful, almost serene. She touched his cold forehead, remembering the fever that had burned there just days ago. "I'm going to make this right," she whispered. "I promise you'll rest proper, in ground blessed by prayer if not by church. Your mother's word on it. The journey began at first light, though calling it light was generous." December in the Colorado Rockies meant the sun barely climbed above the peaks before starting its descent again. Martha followed the old trapper's trail that wound up from Coleridge toward the high country, marked by blazes cut into pine trees decades ago. The first hour wasn't terrible. The trail stayed relatively flat, skirting the edge of frozen Miller's Creek. Ice had claimed everything except a narrow channel in the center where black water rushed over rocks with hypnotic consistency. Martha focused on the sound, using it to pace her breathing and ignore the growing ache in her legs. By the second hour, the trail steepened considerably. Her boots, risoled 3 times already, slipped on patches of ice hidden beneath fresh snow. She fell twice, catching herself on bare hands that came away scraped and bleeding. The thin air made her head swim, and she had to stop every few hundred yards to catch her breath. The forest grew denser as she climbed. Ancient pines rose like cathedral pillars, their branches so thick overhead that the snow beneath them was sparse. It created an eerie twilight effect, neither full day nor true darkness. Just an endless grey that played tricks on tired eyes. Martha heard them before she saw them. Voices carried on the wind, male laughter with an edge that made her instinctively step off the trail and crouch behind a fallen log. 3 men emerged from the tree line ahead. She recognized 2 of them, Buck Holloway and his brother Wade, both with reputations for drinking, fighting, and generally making trouble when honest work was scarce. The 3rd man was a stranger, rail-thin, with a pockmarked face, and the kind of eyes that never settled on any one thing for long. "Telling you, the old lady's got money hidden," Buck was saying. "Tommy boy was pulling double shifts for months." "Where'd all that cash go?" "Certainly not into that shithole cabin they lived in," Wade corrected. "Boy's dead, ain't he? And with the widow about to get booted out, place'll be ripe for picking." The stranger spat into the snow. "What if she's still there?" "Then we encourage her to leave," Buck said with a laugh that made Martha's blood run cold. "Old woman alone, no family, no friends willing to help her? Who's going to miss her if she decides to wander off into the woods and never comes back?" They moved past her position, still talking, their voices fading into the distance. Martha remained frozen behind the log until she could no longer hear them, then counted to 100 before moving. Her cabin. They were going to ransack her cabin, and worse, they were considering making sure she wasn't there to tell anyone about it. The thought of Thomas lying there, vulnerable and alone, made her stomach twist. But what could she do? Return now and confront 3 men who clearly had violence in mind. She had no weapons, no way to defend herself or her son's resting place. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. No, the only path forward was up. Find the mountain man, beg for his help, and pray he had more mercy than the God-fearing people of Coleridge. The trail grew brutal in the afternoon. What little warmth the sun provided vanished behind thick clouds that promised snow. Martha's water froze in her canteen, and she had to stop to build a small fire just to melt enough to drink. Her hands shook so badly she could barely strike the matches. As she sat by her pitiful fire, eating a strip of jerky that tasted like leather and despair, Martha allowed herself a moment of complete honesty. This was insane. She was going to die up here, frozen and alone, and Thomas would be desecrated by criminals, and nobody would remember either of them with anything but contempt or indifference. The thought should have broken her. Instead, it kindled something fierce in her chest. If she was going to die, let it be trying. Let her last act be one of desperate love, rather than quiet surrender. She doused the fire and kept climbing. The sun set early, as it always did in December. By 4 o'clock, the light was failing fast. Martha knew she should stop, try to shelter for the night, but something drove her forward. Some instinct, or perhaps just stubbornness, refined over 54 years of surviving. Then she saw it, smoke rising from beyond a ridge, barely visible against the darkening sky. New strength flooded her exhausted limbs. She climbed faster, ignoring the screaming protests from her muscles, the burning in her lungs, the voice in her head that warned she was pushing too hard. The cabin materialized through the trees like something from a fever dream. It was larger than she'd expected, solidly built from logs that had weathered to silver gray. A stone chimney rose from one end, smoke curling from it in steady spirals. Light glowed in the windows, actual glass windows, not the oiled paper or scraped hide she'd expected. Martha stumbled forward, crossed the clearing on legs that barely functioned, and collapsed against the cabin door. She raised her fist and pounded weakly, then harder, desperation giving her strength she didn't know she had left. "Please," her voice came out as a rasp. "Please, I need help." The door opened so suddenly she nearly fell inside. The mountain man filled the doorway completely, his massive frame silhouetted by lamplight from within. Up close, he was even more imposing than she remembered. Not just tall, but broad, with arms like tree trunks and hands that could probably encircle her waist. His dark beard was longer now, and his eyes, shadowed beneath heavy brows, studied her with an intensity that was almost frightening. Martha tried to speak, but her frozen lips wouldn't cooperate. She tried to stand straight, but her legs finally gave out entirely. She felt herself falling, saw those enormous hands reach out, and then everything went dark. Warmth. That was the first thing Martha registered as consciousness returned. Genuine, penetrating warmth that seemed impossible after the brutal cold. She lay on something soft, wrapped in heavy blankets that smelled faintly of pine and wood smoke. Her eyes opened slowly, taking in rough-hewn log walls lined with shelves that held more books than she'd seen outside the town library. A massive stone fireplace dominated one wall, flames dancing behind an iron grate. The cabin was a single large room, meticulously organized, with a workspace near the windows where tools hung in precise rows. A small kitchen area with copper pots gleaming in the firelight, and the bed where she currently lay. The mountain man sat in a chair beside her, his massive frame somehow folded into the wooden seat without making it look ridiculous. He held a tin cup and watched her with those unsettling dark eyes. "You have frostbite on 3 fingers," he said. His voice was deep, roughened by disuse, with an accent she couldn't quite place. "Eastern, maybe. Educated. Mild, fortunately. I've treated them. You'll keep all your digits if you're careful." Martha tried to sit up, but dizziness forced her back down. "My son, drink this first." He extended the cup. "Warm broth with herbs. You're severely dehydrated and malnourished. Talking can wait." Something in his tone made it clear this wasn't a suggestion. Martha accepted the cup with trembling hands, tasting something rich and savory. Chicken broth with thyme and something else she couldn't identify. It was the most delicious thing she'd consumed in weeks. She drained it in desperate gulps, while the mountain man watched without expression. When she finished, he took the cup and refilled it from a pot hanging near the fire. "Slower this time," he instructed. "Too much too fast will make you sick." Martha forced herself to sip, though every instinct screamed to gulp it down. The warmth spread through her chest, and with it came the clarity to truly observe her surroundings. This wasn't the crude shelter she'd imagined. The cabin showed evidence of careful craftsmanship, dovetailed corners, a floor made of smooth planks rather than packed earth, windows that fit their frames perfectly without gaps for wind to penetrate. The books on the shelves ranged from agricultural manuals to volumes of poetry, philosophy texts to medical journals. "You're wondering why a hermit has a library," the mountain man said, reading her expression. "People assume isolation means ignorance. Usually it's the opposite. I didn't mean to presume you didn't, but everyone does." He stood unfolding to his full height and moved to add another log to the fire. "You climbed 8 miles in sub-zero temperatures, poorly equipped and clearly weakened. Either you're running from something or you need something desperately. Which is it?" The directness caught her off guard. Martha set down the cup, gathering what remained of her courage. "I need help burying my son." If the request surprised him, his face didn't show it. He simply nodded, waiting for her to continue. The words spilled out then. Thomas's death, the accusations, the town's rejection, the frozen body wrapped in her grandmother's quilt. She told him about Pastor Wickham's lies, Sheriff Portman's cruelty, the friends who'd turned away. She even mentioned Buck and Wade Holloway, their plans to ransack her cabin. Through it all, the mountain man listened in absolute silence, his expression unreadable. When she finished, exhausted by the confession, he walked to the window and stared out at the darkness. "The people of Coleridge think I'm dangerous," he said finally. "A criminal or insane or both. Does that concern you?" "Should it?" He turned to look at her, and for the first time, something like amusement flickered in his eyes. "You're either very brave or very desperate." "Desperate," Martha admitted. "Though at my age, I suppose there's not much difference." The mountain man moved to his workspace, selecting a heavy shovel from the wall. He tested its edge with his thumb, found it wanting, and began sharpening it with methodical strokes of a whetstone. "I'll help you," he said without looking up. "But we leave at first light. The trail down is treacherous in darkness, and you need rest. Tomorrow, we'll bury your son properly." Relief hit Martha so hard she nearly wept. "I can pay you." "Not much, but I don't want your money." "Then why help me?" The question hung in the air while he continued sharpening the shovel. When he finally answered, his voice had gone quiet, almost vulnerable. "Because 15 years ago I was you, standing over someone I loved, begging for help that never came. I swore if I ever had the chance to be better than the people who turned me away, I would be." He set down the shovel and moved to a chest in the corner, pulling out thick blankets and a pillow. "You take the bed. I'll sleep by the fire." "I can't take your—" "You can and you will. Arguing wastes energy you don't have." He arranged the blankets near the hearth with practiced efficiency. "We have hard work ahead tomorrow. Sleep." Martha wanted to ask more, about who he'd lost, what had driven him into isolation, whether the rumors about his past were true. But exhaustion pulled at her like a physical weight, and within minutes of settling back into the warm bed, she was unconscious. She woke once during the night, disoriented, and saw him sitting by the fire. He wasn't sleeping, but reading by lamplight, a leather-bound volume open in his enormous hands. His lips moved silently, forming words she couldn't hear, and his expression held a sadness so profound it made her chest ache. Then sleep reclaimed her, and when she woke again, dawn light filtered through the windows. The mountain man had prepared breakfast, cornmeal porridge with dried berries, hard bread toasted over the fire, and strong coffee that tasted like heaven. Martha ate ravenously, surprised by how much her appetite had returned. "Your fingers," he said, gesturing. "How do they feel?" Martha examined her hands, finding 3 fingers wrapped in clean bandages. "They throb dully, but not unbearably. Better than they should, I think. The salve will prevent infection. Change the dressing twice daily." He packed supplies into a worn canvas bag, rope, tools, water skins, food. "The descent will be easier than your climb, but still dangerous. Stay close and step where I step." They set out as the sun broke over the eastern peaks, painting the snow in shades of pink and gold. The mountain man moved with surprising grace for his size, navigating the icy trail with the confidence of someone who'd walked it 1,000 times. Martha followed, grateful for the walking stick he'd given her and the hot food warming her belly. He spoke little during the journey, but when he did, it was practical, warning her of loose stones, pointing out places where the trail narrowed dangerously, instructing her when to rest. Around mid-morning, they paused near the frozen creek where Martha had stopped the day before. "Tell me about your son," the mountain man said, surprising her. "What kind of person was he?" The question opened something in Martha's chest. She found herself talking about Thomas as a child, curious and gentle, always bringing home injured animals to nurse. She described his fierce loyalty to friends, his habit of whistling while he worked, his dreams of someday opening a carpentry shop where he could build furniture instead of digging coal from hostile earth. He was teaching himself to read properly, she said, voice thick with emotion. Saved up and bought himself a primer, practiced every night by lamplight. Said he wanted to read all the books in the world. The mountain man listened, without interrupting, and when she finished, he simply nodded. "He sounds like someone worth remembering properly." They reached the outskirts of Coleridge by early afternoon. The mountain men stopped at the tree line, studying the town below with narrowed eyes. "Your cabin, the one on Miller's Creek Road." "How did you know?" "I pay attention." He adjusted the tools on his back. "We approach each other carefully. If those men you overheard are there, we'll need to convince them to leave." "You mean fight them?" "I mean convince them." The distinction in his tone was subtle but unmistakable. "Violence is a tool for people who've run out of better options. We haven't yet." They descended into the town, attracting immediate attention. People stopped in the street to stare, conversations dying mid-sentence. The mountain man ignored them completely, his focus fixed on the path ahead. But Martha felt the weight of every gaze. "That's her," someone whispered. "The widow with the cursed boy." What's she doing with him? Nothing good, I'd wager. Martha's cabin came into view and her heart sank. The door hung open, and even from a distance, she could see signs of disturbance, overturned furniture visible through the windows. Her carefully tended flower boxes smashed on the ground. The mountain man's pace didn't change, but something in his posture shifted. He moved with a predator's alertness now, every sense focused on potential threat. They were 20 feet from the cabin when Buck Holloway emerged, carrying Martha's iron skillet. He stopped dead when he saw them, his cocky grin faltering. "Well, well," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "The dead boy's mother finally comes home, and she brought the crazy mountain man. This should be interesting." Wade appeared in the doorway behind his brother, along with the pockmarked stranger. They'd clearly been drinking. Empty bottles littered the porch, and Wade swayed slightly. "You boys need to leave," the mountain man said quietly. "Now?" Buck laughed, though it sounded forced. "Or what exactly?" "You'll stare us to death with those spooky eyes of yours, or I'll remove you. The choice is yours. Walk out with dignity or be carried out with none." The stranger pulled a knife from his belt, a wicked-looking blade that gleamed in the afternoon sun. "Big talk from a man everyone says is soft in the head. 3 against 1, friend. You might want to reconsider." The mountain man sighed, as if dealing with particularly stupid children, and set down his pack. "Mrs. Brennan, stay behind me, please." What happened next occurred so quickly Martha barely processed it. The stranger lunged forward with his knife, fast and clearly experienced with violence. The mountain man simply wasn't where the blade passed. He'd moved with impossible speed, caught the stranger's wrist, and twisted. The knife dropped to the ground, followed immediately by the stranger himself, clutching his arm and howling. Buck and Wade rushed forward together. The mountain man caught Buck's wild punch, turned it into some kind of joint lock that sent him crashing into his brother. Both men tumbled into the dirt, their bravado evaporating. "I don't enjoy hurting people," the mountain man said, his tone almost apologetic. "But I'm very, very good at it when necessary." "Are we done here?" The stranger scrambled to his feet, cradling his injured wrist, and ran without looking back. Buck and Wade helped each other up, backing away slowly. "The sheriff will hear about this," Buck spat, trying to salvage some pride. "I hope so. I'll tell him about your plans to rob a widow and make her disappear in the woods. I wonder who he'll believe. 3 drunks with criminal records, or the woman whose son you're currently robbing." The brothers fled, leaving overturned furniture and broken glass in their wake. Martha stepped around the mountain man and entered her cabin, bracing herself for the worst. They'd ransacked the place thoroughly, drawers dumped, mattresses torn apart, floorboards pried up. But they hadn't found what they were looking for, because there was nothing to find. Thomas's meager savings had paid for medicine during his illness. She moved to the corner where Thomas lay, still wrapped in the quilt. They hadn't touched him, at least. Some final shred of superstition or decency had kept their greed-stained hands away. "Tell me where you want him buried," the mountain man said from the doorway. "I'll prepare the site." Martha thought of the church cemetery that had rejected her son, of the sanctimonious lies and cruel assumptions. An idea formed, one that felt right in a way she couldn't fully articulate. "There's a place," she said slowly, "up on Whispering Ridge, where the aspens grow. Thomas and I used to hike there when he was little. He said it was the most peaceful spot in the world. Would that be appropriate?" "It's perfect," the mountain man replied. "Grab what you need for the ceremony. I'll prepare him for transport." He handled Thomas's body with profound gentleness, wrapping additional blankets for protection and fashioning a sled from wood he found in Martha's shed. The sun was already descending toward the western peaks when they finally set out for Whispering Ridge. The journey took 2 hours, climbing a different trail than the one Martha had taken yesterday. The mountain man pulled the sled himself, refusing her offers to help. His strength apparently limitless. They reached the ridge as sunset painted the sky in impossible colors, deep purples and brilliant oranges, gold light filtering through the bare aspen branches. Snow had drifted thick here, but beneath it Martha could see the hollow where she and Thomas had once shared sandwiches and watched hawks circle. The mountain man selected a spot beneath the largest aspen, its white bark glowing in the dying light. Then he began to dig. Martha had expected the frozen ground to resist, to make the work impossible. But the mountain man attacked the earth with methodical determination, his shovel breaking through frost with steady, rhythmic strikes. He worked without stopping, without complaint, his breath forming clouds in the freezing air. After an hour, he'd excavated a proper grave, deep and respectful, the dimensions precise. He climbed out, breathing heavily for the first time since Martha had met him, and nodded to her. "It's ready. Would you like a moment before we lower him?" Martha knelt beside Thomas one last time, touching the quilt that held him. She whispered words only she and her son could hear, apologies for failing to protect him, promises that he'd be remembered with love, hopes that wherever his soul had gone, he'd found the peace that life had denied him. When she finished, the mountain man lifted Thomas's body as if it weighed nothing, and gently lowered him into the earth. He climbed back out and stood beside Martha, head bowed. "Do you know any prayers?" she asked. "Some. Would you like me to speak to them?" Martha shook her head. "I think Thomas had enough of churches and their prayers. Just say something true." The mountain man was quiet for a long moment, then spoke in that deep, rough voice. "We commit this body to the earth, this spirit to whatever peace exists beyond our understanding. Thomas Brennan was loved by his mother, and that love is worth more than all the gold in these mountains, all the approval of people too small to see his worth. May the aspens remember him when they bloom. May the hawks speak his name on the wind, and may those of us who remain learn to be worthy of the loyalty he showed." Martha's tears came then, silent and cleansing. The mountain man handed her a handkerchief and began filling the grave with surprising gentleness, each shovelful placed with care rather than hurried efficiency. When he finished, he marked the site with stones arranged in a careful cairn, then stepped back. Full darkness had fallen, but the moon was rising, bright enough to illuminate their path home. Martha stood looking at her son's final resting place, feeling something settle in her chest. Not peace exactly, but acceptance. Thomas lay beneath aspens in a place of beauty, spoken over with honest words by a stranger who'd shown more humanity than anyone in Coleridge. "Thank you," she said, voice hoarse. "I don't know how to repay you for this." The mountain man shouldered his tools. "You already have. You reminded me that isolation isn't the same as righteousness, and that sometimes the greatest thing we can do is simply refuse to be as cruel as the world expects." They descended through moonlit forest, neither speaking, both lost in private thoughts, and watching them from the shadows, though neither knew it. Yet was someone who'd seen everything and would ensure that what happened on Whispering Ridge that night became something more than just a widow's desperate bargain with a hermit, someone who would make certain the mountain man's secret couldn't stay buried. No matter how deeply he'd tried to hide it, the figure watching from the tree line belonged to a 16-year-old girl named Eliza Cartwright, and she had every reason to be terrified of what she'd witnessed. She'd been foraging for winter herbs, a desperate attempt to find something, anything, to help her younger sister Nora's racking cough, when she'd heard voices carrying through the still mountain air. Curiosity had drawn her closer, then frozen her in place as she watched the mountain man dig a grave with the steady precision of someone who'd done it before. But it wasn't the burial that made Eliza's heart hammer against her ribs. It was the face she'd glimpsed when the mountain man had paused to wipe sweat from his brow, moonlight illuminating his features with perfect clarity. She knew that face. Everyone in Colorado knew that face, or at least a younger version of it, sketched on wanted posters that had circulated 5 years ago. Dr. Jonathan Reeves, wanted for murder. Eliza had been 11 when the story exploded across newspapers from Denver to Sacramento. Dr. Reeves, a brilliant surgeon at Denver General Hospital, had been accused of killing his wife and daughter in a fit of rage. The prosecution painted him as a monster who'd snapped under the pressure of his demanding career. They claimed he'd staged the scene to look like a home invasion, But inconsistencies in his testimony had damned him. He'd fled before the trial could conclude, vanishing into the wilderness with a price on his head. The reward had been substantial, $5,000 for information leading to his capture. That reward had never been claimed because Dr. Jonathan Reeves had simply ceased to exist, replaced by a nameless hermit the locals called the Mountain Man. Eliza pressed herself against the rough bark of a pine tree, mind racing through impossible calculations. $5,000. That kind of money could change everything. Proper medicine for Nora, food that wasn't moldy bread and thin soup, maybe even passage to California where her aunt lived. Her father had died in a mining collapse 2 years ago, leaving Eliza to care for her mother and 3 younger siblings on wages from cleaning houses for Coleridge's wealthier families. $5,000 could save them all, but as she watched the Mountain Man, Dr. Reeves, speak words over Thomas Brennan's grave with genuine tenderness, as she saw Martha Brennan weep while he handed her a handkerchief, Eliza felt her certainty crumble like wet sand. Murderers didn't speak funeral rites with that kind of reverence. Monsters didn't spend hours digging graves in frozen earth for strangers. The man she'd just witnessed bore no resemblance to the villain described in those old newspapers. Eliza waited until they'd descended the ridge before emerging from her hiding spot. She stood at the edge of Thomas's grave, looking at the carefully arranged cairn, and made a decision that terrified her even as she committed to it. She would do nothing. Not yet. Not until she understood what was really true. The walk back to Coleridge took her 3 hours through darkness that threatened to swallow her whole. By the time she reached the dilapidated shack her family called home, her mother was frantic. "Where have you been?" Caroline Cartwright demanded, her gaunt face pinched with worry and anger. "Nora's been crying for you, and the boys haven't eaten." "I found wild onions," Eliza lied, pulling a handful of half-frozen specimens from her pocket. She'd grabbed them on the way down, knowing she'd need some excuse. Took longer than expected. "How's Nora?" Her mother's expression softened into resignation. "The same. Maybe worse. That cough is getting deeper." Eliza moved past her mother into the single room where her siblings slept. Nora, just 7 years old, lay curled under threadbare blankets, her small chest heaving with each labored breath. The sound was wet and rattling, the kind of cough that spoke of fluid in the lungs. Her brothers, David and Marcus, 9 and 11 respectively, looked up from the corner where they'd been playing with wooden soldiers their father had carved years ago. Their faces were hollow with hunger, eyes too large in their gaunt faces. "Did you bring food?" Marcus asked, his voice small and hopeful. "Tomorrow," Eliza promised, hating herself for the lie. "I'll get us something tomorrow." She spent the night lying awake, listening to Nora's tortured breathing and thinking about wanted posters, about $5,000, about the look of profound gentleness on a murderer's face as he buried a stranger's son. Morning brought a light snow and a knock at their door that made Eliza's stomach drop. Sheriff Dale. Portman stood on the sagging porch, his bulk filling the doorframe. Behind him lurked Deputy Carl Hendricks, a young man whose primary qualifications seemed to be an enthusiasm for violence and an inability to question authority. "Miss Cartwright," Portman said, touching the brim of his hat with mock courtesy. "Need a word about something that happened yesterday." Eliza's mother appeared at her shoulder. "What's this about, Sheriff?" "We've done nothing wrong. Not saying you have, ma'am. Just investigating a disturbance." Buck and Wade Holloway claimed they were assaulted by the Mountain Man who lives up at Widow's Peak. Said he threatened to kill them, attacked them without provocation. "You know anything about that?" Eliza's mind raced. She hadn't witnessed the confrontation at Martha's cabin, but she could imagine it well enough. "The Holloway brothers were notorious liars and thieves." "I don't know anything about that, Sheriff," she said carefully. "I was out foraging most of yesterday." "Out where exactly?" "Near Copper Creek, looking for winter herbs." Another lie, but one that couldn't be easily disproved. Portman's eyes narrowed. "Interesting. Because I got another report that someone was seen up near Whispering Ridge last night. Around the same time, the Mountain Man and Martha Brennan were supposedly up there burying her cursed boy in unsanctioned ground." Eliza kept her expression blank. I don't know anything about that, sir. You sure? Because if you were up there, if you saw something, there might be a reward in it for you. That mountain man is dangerous, girl. We've been tolerating him because he keeps to himself, but now he's assaulting good citizens and helping that widow spread her fever around. Time he was dealt with. The implication was clear. Tell us what we want to hear, and we'll make it worth your while. Probably not $5,000, but enough to make a difference to a family as desperate as the Cartwrights. I'm sorry I can't help you, Sheriff, Eliza said, meeting his gaze steadily. I didn't see anything. Portman studied her for a long moment, then spat into the snow. You're making a mistake, girl. Loyalty to the wrong people has a way of coming back to bite you. He left, Deputy Hendricks trailing behind like an obedient dog. Eliza closed the door and found her mother staring at her with an expression she couldn't read. What aren't you telling me? Caroline asked quietly. Nothing that matters. Don't lie to me, Eliza. I'm your mother. I know when you're hiding something. Eliza looked at Nora, still sleeping fitfully, at her brothers pretending not to listen from their corner. I saw something that could be worth a lot of money, but I don't think it's the right thing to do. Her mother's face hardened. Right and wrong are luxuries for people with full bellies and warm houses. We're one bad week from starving, Eliza. Your sister needs medicine we can't afford. If you know something that could help this family, it's not that simple. It never is. But you need to decide what's more important. Strangers who don't care whether we live or die, or your own blood. The words hit like a physical blow because they were true. What did Eliza owe to Martha Brennan or the mountain man? They were nothing to her, less than nothing. Her family was dying by inches, and she had information that could save them. But the image of that careful cairn, those gentle hands, that voice speaking honest words over a grave wouldn't leave her mind. Meanwhile, 3 miles away, in Martha Brennan's ransacked cabin, a different conversation was unfolding. Martha had insisted the mountain man stay the night rather than risk the trail in darkness. He'd reluctantly agreed, and now sat at her small table while she prepared the only meal she could offer, weak tea and the last of her bread. You don't have to stay, she said, setting a chipped cup before him. I'm grateful for what you've done, but I won't trap you here out of politeness. I'm not staying out of politeness, he replied, wrapping his large hands around the cup. I'm staying because those Holloway brothers will likely be back. Probably with friends. You shouldn't be alone. Martha settled into the chair across from him, studying his face in the lamplight. Up close, she could see the fine lines around his eyes, the grey threading through his dark beard more extensively than she'd first noticed. He carried himself like a man in his 40s, but those eyes held the kind of weariness that had nothing to do with age. Who were you? She asked quietly. Before you became the mountain man. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Someone who learned that the truth doesn't matter as much as people want to believe it does. That sounds like a story. It is. Not a very interesting one. Martha sipped her tea, watching him over the rim of her cup. You said yesterday that 15 years ago you stood over someone you loved, begging for help. Will you tell me about them? For a long moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he set down his cup and spoke, his voice low and rough with emotion he couldn't quite suppress. Her name was Catherine. My wife. Our daughter was Lily. She'd just turned 6. He stared at his hands as if they belonged to someone else. I was a surgeon in Denver. Good at my job, maybe too good. I took pride in saving people others had given up on. Worked ridiculous hours, sacrificed time with my family because I told myself I was doing important work. Martha said nothing, letting him continue at his own pace. One night I came home late from the hospital, found them in the parlor. Someone had broken in, taken everything valuable, and... His voice cracked. Catherine had tried to protect Lily. The intruder killed them both. Probably didn't mean to. The coroner said it looked like they'd fought back, and he'd panicked. But intent doesn't bring back the dead. I'm so sorry, Martha whispered. The police arrived before I could even process what I was seeing. Found me covered in their blood. I'd tried to revive them, you understand. Surgical training overriding reason. One of the officers recognized some inconsistencies in the scene. How the door had been forced, the pattern of the attack. Started asking questions about my marriage, my finances, whether I'd been having an affair. His hands curled into fists on the table. Within hours, I went from grieving husband to primary suspect. They built a case on coincidence and circumstantial evidence. My colleagues testified that I'd been stressed, that I'd complained about money despite my salary. A neighbor claimed she'd heard Catherine and me arguing. Never mind that every married couple argues. The prosecutor convinced a judge to deny bail, said I was a flight risk. But you were innocent, Martha said. Innocent doesn't mean protected. My own attorney advised me to plea bargain, take 20 years instead of life. Said no jury would believe me once they saw the evidence stacked against me. So I ran. He looked up, meeting her eyes for the first time since beginning his story. Probably the stupidest thing I could have done. Made me look guilty to everyone. But I couldn't sit in that cell. Couldn't bear the thought of spending decades in prison for a crime I didn't commit, while my family's real killer walked free. Did they ever find who actually did it? His laugh was bitter. No, case went cold within a month. The newspapers stopped covering it once I disappeared. Hard to sell papers without a villain to vilify. I became a cautionary tale, a monster story to frighten children. And somewhere out there, the person who actually murdered my wife and daughter is living their life without consequence. Martha reached across the table, placing her weathered hand over his. You survived. That takes its own kind of courage, does it? Sometimes I think cowardice and courage look identical from certain angles. He turned his hand over, squeezing hers gently. But today, helping you, giving Thomas a proper resting place, it's the first time in 15 years I've felt like maybe survival was worth something. They sat in silence for a while. Two people bound by loss and society's failures, finding unexpected solace in each other's company. The moment shattered when someone pounded on the cabin door hard enough to rattle its hinges. Martha Brennan! Sheriff Portman's voice boomed from outside. Open this door by order of the law. The mountain man was on his feet instantly, positioning himself between Martha and the door. Stay behind me. Whatever happens, stay behind me. Martha's heart hammered as the pounding continued. Through the window she could see torchlight, not just Portman, but multiple men. The sheriff had brought backup. I know the mountain man's in there with you, Martha. Portman shouted. And I know what you two did up at Whispering Ridge. Burying bodies in unsanctioned ground is illegal, in case you've forgotten. Now you've got a fugitive harboring situation on top of everything else. The mountain man moved to the window, peering through a gap in the curtain. His expression darkened. 8 men, all armed. This isn't an arrest. It's a lynch mob dressed up as law enforcement. What do we do? Martha asked, fighting down panic. You open the door and cooperate. Tell them I forced you to help me bury your son, that you were frightened and had no choice. They'll believe that. It fits their narrative that I'm dangerous and you're a helpless victim. I won't lie to protect you. You did nothing but help me, and I'll be fine. I've survived worse than small-town prejudice. But his eyes told a different story. He knew exactly how this would end. Not with a trial or justice, but with a rope and a tree. Martha made a decision. She moved to the door before he could stop her and threw it open, stepping out onto the porch to face Portman and his mob. The mountain man is under my protection. Sheriff, she said, her voice steady despite her terror. He committed no crime. He helped a grieving mother give her son a decent burial when the rest of this town turned their backs on us. If you want to arrest someone, arrest me for violating whatever petty ordinances you're pretending to care about. But you'll have to go through me to get to him. Portman's face reddened. You're harboring a dangerous criminal, Martha. We have reports he assaulted Buck and Wade Holloway. Buck and Wade were ransacking my home, planning to rob and possibly murder me. Martha shot back. I heard them discussing it. The mountain man defended me, nothing more. If you want to arrest someone for assault, start with those two and their pockmarked friend. A murmur rippled through the crowd of men. Some looked uncomfortable, others angry. Martha recognized most of them. Miners who drank too much, young men looking for excitement, and a few genuine believers in law and order who'd been sold a false narrative. Then a new voice cut through the tension. "She's telling the truth." Eliza Cartwright pushed through the crowd, her young face set with determination. "I was on Whispering Ridge last night. I saw everything. The mountain man didn't threaten anyone. He dug a grave and spoke kind words and helped Mrs. Brennan when nobody else would. That's not a crime. That's human decency, which is apparently in short supply around here." Portman whirled on her. "You told me this morning you didn't see anything." I lied. "Because I could see where this was heading, and I won't be part of murdering an innocent man to collect a bounty." Eliza's voice rang clear and strong. "Yes, I know who he is, Dr. Jonathan Reeves. And I also know he was never proven guilty of anything except being in the wrong place when tragedy struck. Maybe instead of forming lynch mobs, we should ask ourselves why we're so eager to destroy someone who's done nothing but try to disappear and be left alone." The crowd shifted, uncertain now. The righteous anger that had fueled them to Martha's cabin began evaporating in the face of a 16-year-old girl's courage. Dr. Reeves, no longer just the mountain man, stepped onto the porch beside Martha. He looked at Eliza with something like wonder. "You didn't have to do this. There was money in it for you if you'd stayed quiet." "I know," Eliza said simply, "but I've got to live with myself." "Turns out that's worth more than any reward," Sheriff Portman sputtered, trying to reassert control. "This doesn't change anything. We still have grounds for arrest. On what charges?" Eliza demanded. "Helping someone bury their son. Defending a woman from thieves. Or is the real crime being someone you can't bully into silence?" The crowd was dissolving now, men drifting away into the darkness, their enthusiasm for vigilante justice thoroughly dampened. Portman stood alone with his deputy, both looking foolish and impotent. "This isn't over," the sheriff growled. "Not by a long shot." "I think it is," Martha said quietly. "Unless you want to explain to the county marshal why you formed a lynch mob instead of following proper legal procedures." "I may be poor, Sheriff, but I'm not stupid. I know my rights, and I know you violated them tonight." Portman left without another word, Hendricks trailing behind. The street emptied, leaving just Martha, Dr. Reeves, and Eliza standing in the cold December night. "Thank you." Dr. Reeves said to Eliza, "You've given me something I haven't had in 15 years, the possibility of living without hiding." Eliza shrugged, trying to look casual despite the tears on her cheeks. "Don't thank me yet. I just made sure the whole town knows who you really are. That's going to complicate your life considerably." "Maybe," he acknowledged. "Or maybe it's time to stop running and start fighting to clear my name properly. Either way, I owe you a debt I can never repay." "Actually," Eliza said, glancing back toward her own dilapidated home, "there might be something you can do. My little sister is very sick. Lung infection, I think." "We can't afford a doctor, and—" "Take me to her," Dr. Reeves interrupted. "Now, lung infections are treatable if caught early, but they become deadly fast." As they hurried through the snow-covered streets, Martha walking beside them, none of them noticed the figure watching from the shadows outside the general store. A man with connections to newspapers, to law enforcement, to people who'd been searching for Dr. Jonathan Reeves for 15 years. A man who saw opportunity where others saw redemption. The real battle, it seemed, was only just beginning. The Cartwright shack smelled of sickness and despair. Dr. Jonathan Reeves had to duck to enter through the low doorway, his medical instincts already cataloguing everything. The inadequate ventilation, the dampness that promoted mold growth, the lack of proper heat that turned cold into a co-conspirator with disease. Caroline Cartwright stood frozen in shock as the notorious mountain man filled her cramped home. Her protective instinct warred with desperation as her eyes darted between Eliza and the massive stranger. "Mama, he's a doctor," Eliza said quickly. "He can help Nora." "He's also wanted for murder," Caroline hissed, though she didn't raise her voice loud enough to wake the children. "You brought him here?" "To our home." "I brought a physician to see your dying daughter," Eliza countered. "Everything else is noise." Dr. Reeves moved past them both without waiting for permission, crossing to where Nora lay. He knelt beside her, his large frame somehow conveying gentleness as he pressed the back of his hand to her forehead. The child's eyes fluttered open, fever-bright and confused. "Hello, Nora," he said softly. "My name is Jonathan. I'm going to listen to your chest, all right? It might feel cold." He produced a stethoscope from his coat. Martha noticed he still carried it after all these years, a talisman from his former life. He listened to Nora's breathing with eyes closed, concentration absolute, while her mother watched with the helpless terror of someone witnessing their worst fears confirmed. After several minutes, Dr. Reeves sat back on his heels. "Pneumonia advanced stage. Left lung is significantly compromised. Without treatment, she has perhaps 3 days, maybe 4. He looked at Caroline with unflinching honesty. "With proper care, her chances improve to about 70% survival. But we need to start immediately." "We have no money," Caroline whispered. "Whatever treatment cost, I don't want money. I want permission to help your daughter." He stood, towering in the small space. "I'll need supplies from the general store and the apothecary. Eliza, you'll need to convince the shopkeepers to extend credit. Tell them Dr. Reeves will pay when his account's clear. That should buy us enough time to obtain what we need." "Doctor," Martha interjected from the doorway, "using your real name might complicate matters. Given tonight's events, let it complicate," he replied with unexpected steel in his voice. "I'm tired of hiding. If Coleridge wants to condemn me, they can do it while watching me save this child's life." Marcus and David had woken, watching from their corner with wide eyes. Dr. Reeves noticed them and softened his tone. "Boys, I need you to do something important. Boil water, as much as you can manage. Keep it hot! Can you do that?" They nodded eagerly, grateful to have purpose. Within minutes, the shack transformed into organized chaos, water boiling. Dr. Reeves issuing calm instructions, Eliza racing to the general store with Martha close behind to lend credibility. The store was still open, proprietor Herman Walsh counting his till for the night. He looked up in surprise as the two women burst through the door. "We need medical supplies," Martha said. "On credit. For the Cartwright girl." Walsh's expression closed like a shuttered window. "Credit? The Cartwrights are 3 months behind on their account already." "I can't. Dr. Reeves will pay," Eliza interrupted. "The Mountain Man. He's treating my sister, and he's good for the debt." "The Mountain Man?" Walsh's eyebrows climbed toward his receding hairline. "The same one Sheriff Portman tried to arrest not an hour ago. The one who's supposedly a wanted murderer? That's your credit reference?" "Yeah," Eliza said simply. "Because unlike everyone else in this town, he actually cares whether a 7-year-old girl lives or dies." Walsh studied them both, calculator mind weighing risk against reward, morality against pragmatism. Finally, he sighed. "What do you need?" 20 minutes later, they returned to the shack laden with supplies: willow bark for fever, mullein and horehound for the lungs, clean bandages, alcohol for sterilization, and various tinctures Dr. Reeves had specified. He received them with a grunt of approval and immediately set to work. What followed was a masterclass in medical care that left even Caroline, her distrust battling with hope, mesmerized. Dr. Reeves mixed precise doses of herbal remedies with the confidence of someone who'd done it thousands of times. He created a steam tent using boiled water and medicinal herbs, positioning Nora beneath it to help clear her congested lungs. He showed Caroline how to perform chest percussion, gentle tapping that would help loosen mucus, and explained the dosing schedule with meticulous detail. "Every 4 hours, she gets this mixture," he instructed, demonstrating the preparation. "It'll taste terrible, but it's essential. The steam tent treatment twice daily, morning and evening. And she needs to sit upright as much as possible. Lying flat makes the congestion worse." He worked through the night, monitoring Nora's breathing, adjusting treatments based on her response, explaining everything he did so Caroline could continue care in his absence. Martha made herself useful boiling water, preparing the herb mixtures, cleaning instruments. Eliza kept her brothers occupied and quiet. By dawn, Nora's breathing had noticeably improved. The rattling wheeze had diminished, replaced by clearer respiration. Her fever, while still present, had dropped several degrees. She even managed to sip some broth without immediately coughing it back up. Dr. Reeves allowed himself a small smile. "She's responding well. Continue the treatment regimen exactly as I've shown you. I'll return this evening to check her progress." Caroline blocked his path to the door, tears streaming down her weathered face. "Why? Why would you help us? You don't know us. We're nothing to you. You're a mother trying to save her child," he replied quietly. "That's everything to me. It's what my wife was doing when she died, protecting our daughter from someone who meant them harm. If I can prevent another mother from experiencing that loss, then maybe Catherine and Lily's deaths weren't completely without purpose." He left before Caroline could respond, stepping out into grey morning light that promised more snow. Martha followed, catching up to him on the frozen street. "You can't go back to your cabin," she said. "Not now. Everyone knows who you are. Sheriff Portman will bring federal marshals or bounty hunters or worse. I know." Dr. Reeves looked toward the mountains that had sheltered him for 15 years. "But I can't run anymore, Martha. I'm so tired of running." "Then don't run. Fight." She grabbed his arm, forcing him to face her. "You saved my son's dignity and Nora's life. Let me help you reclaim your own." "How?" "I'm a wanted man. There's a price on my head. The justice system already condemned me once. Why would it be any different now?" "Because this time you'll have witnesses. People who will testify to your character. And because the real killer is still out there. Maybe we can find evidence, something the original investigation missed." Dr. Reeves laughed bitterly. "After 15 years? Any evidence is long gone, Martha. I appreciate the thought, but Jonathan Reeves." They both turned. A man approached from the direction of the hotel, middle-aged, well-dressed for Coleridge, with the look of someone who'd spent more time in cities than mining towns. He carried a leather satchel and walked with purpose. "Who's asking?" Dr. Reeves tensed, ready for confrontation. "My name is Lawrence Bennett. I'm a journalist with the Rocky Mountain Herald. I've been investigating your case for the past 3 years. He stopped a respectful distance away, hands visible and empty. "I believe you're innocent, Dr. Reeves, and I think I can prove it." The words hung in the frozen air, like impossible promises. Martha felt Dr. Reeves go rigid beside her, hope and suspicion warring across his features. "Why would a journalist care about a 15-year-old case?" he asked. "Because it never sat right with me. I covered your trial, what little of it happened before you fled. The evidence was circumstantial at best. The prosecution's timeline had holes you could drive a wagon through. And the detective who led the investigation was later fired for evidence tampering in an unrelated case." Bennett shifted his satchel. "I've spent 3 years tracking down witnesses who were never called, examining police records that were conveniently lost. I've been following leads the original investigation ignored." "And what exactly did you find?" Dr. Reeves's voice was carefully neutral, enough to suggest your wife and daughter were killed by someone they knew, someone who had a key to your home, someone who knew your surgery schedule, and that you'd be at the hospital that night. Bennett met his gaze steadily. "Someone who had motive that had nothing to do with you." Dr. Reeves grabbed Bennett's shoulder so suddenly the journalist flinched. "Who? If you know who killed my family, tell me now. I have theories, not proof." "Not yet. That's why I've been searching for you. I need your help to fill in the gaps. Details about your life back then. People who had access to your home. Anyone who might have had reason to harm Catherine or Lily." Martha watched emotions cascade across Dr. Reeves's face. Rage, grief, desperate hope, and something that might have been fear. The prospect of answers after 15 years of torment was overwhelming. "Where do we start?" he asked finally. "With your memories. Everything you can recall about the weeks leading up to the murders. But first," Bennett glanced around the quiet street nervously, "we need to get you somewhere safe. I spotted federal marshals arriving on the morning train. They're asking questions at the hotel. Someone telegraphed them about your location. Probably whoever was watching us last night," Martha said. "After the confrontation with Sheriff Portman." "Could be the sheriff himself," Bennett suggested. Or someone looking to collect the reward. Either way, we don't have much time. Dr. Reeves, you need to disappear, at least temporarily. I'm done disappearing. Then you'll be arrested within hours, and any chance of clearing your name vanishes. You can't prove innocence from a jail cell, especially not when the people who want you convicted have had 15 years to cover their tracks. Bennett's urgency was palpable. I have a room at the boarding house on Pine Street. It's registered under my name, and nobody knows we're connected. You can hide there while we figure out next steps. Dr. Reeves looked at Martha, seeking guidance. She nodded. He's right. You can't help anyone if you're in chains. Nora still needs monitoring, and there are probably others in this town who could benefit from a real doctor. Stay free long enough to make a difference, then face whatever comes. Logic won over pride. Dr. Reeves agreed to Bennett's plan, and within the hour, they'd spirited him to the boarding house through back alleys and careful timing. Martha returned to her cabin, trying to project normalcy despite the adrenaline singing through her veins. The federal marshals arrived at her door by mid-morning. There were two of them, Marshal Davis, a hard-faced man in his 50s with eyes that had seen too much, and his younger partner, Marshal Cooper, who still possessed enough idealism to look uncomfortable about their mission. Mrs. Brennan, Davis said without preamble, we're looking for a fugitive named Jonathan Reeves. We have reason to believe you've had contact with him. I'll need you to tell me everything you know. Martha invited them in with practiced calm, offering coffee she could barely afford. They accepted, and she took her time preparing it, organizing her thoughts. I did meet Dr. Reeves, she said finally, setting cups before them. He helped me bury my son when nobody else would. Treated me with more kindness than anyone in this town has shown since Thomas died. You know he's wanted for double murder? Davis asked. I know he's accused of it. That's not the same thing. Cooper leaned forward. Ma'am, he fled before his trial concluded. Innocent men don't run. Innocent men do when they realize the system is rigged against them, Martha countered. I've lived 54 years, Marshal. Long enough to know that justice and law aren't always the same thing. Davis's expression remained impassive. Where is he now? I don't know. After he helped me bury Thomas, he left. Could be back in the mountains, could be anywhere. You're lying. But it wasn't an accusation, just a statement of fact. Perhaps. Or perhaps I'm simply refusing to help you arrest a man whose only crime, in my experience, was showing compassion to a desperate widow. Martha met Davis's hard gaze without flinching. You want to arrest me for that, Marshal? Go ahead. But I won't help you hunt someone who's done nothing but good since the moment I met him. The marshals exchanged glances. Cooper clearly wanted to push harder, but Davis shook his head slightly. We'll be staying in town for a few days, Davis said, standing, conducting a thorough search. If Dr. Reeves contacts you, or if you remember anything useful, you know where to find us. He paused at the door. Mrs. Brennan, obstruction of justice is a serious charge. I'd hate to see you in prison because you misplaced your loyalty. After they left, Martha sat trembling with delayed fear. She'd just lied to federal officers, a crime that could land her in genuine legal trouble. But the alternative, betraying the man who'd given Thomas dignity in death, was unthinkable. A soft knock interrupted her spiraling thoughts. She opened the door to find Eliza, breathless from running. Nora's fever broke, the girl said, grinning despite her exhaustion. She's asking for food, real food, not just broth. Dr. Reeves's treatment worked. Relief washed over Martha like warm water. At least something had gone right. That's wonderful news. Have you seen him today? No, but I heard the marshals are searching every building in town. Mrs. Brennan, what are we going to do? If they find him, they won't. Martha's voice held more confidence than she felt. Because we're going to prove he's innocent before they get the chance. This journalist, Bennett, do you know where he's staying? Boarding house on Pine Street, I heard. Room 6. Good. Go there. Tell Dr. Reeves that Nora's improving and ask him what he needs from us. Information, witnesses, anything. If we're going to clear his name, we need to act fast." Eliza nodded and vanished into the cold afternoon. Martha closed her door and leaned against it, exhaustion finally catching up with her. 5 days ago, her biggest problem had been burying her son. Now she was harboring a fugitive, lying to federal authorities, and attempting to solve a 15-year-old double murder. But as she thought of Thomas resting peacefully beneath the aspens, of Nora breathing easier thanks to Dr. Reeves's skill, of Eliza's courage in defending a stranger, Martha felt something she hadn't experienced since her son fell ill. Purpose. The town of Coleridge had shown its true colors, small, cruel, driven by fear and prejudice. But scattered, among the cowards and hypocrites, were people worth fighting for. People who understood that sometimes breaking rules was the only moral choice available. That evening, Martha did something she hadn't done in years. She pulled out her husband's old writing desk, found paper and ink that hadn't completely dried, and began composing letters. To newspapers, to lawyers, to anyone who might listen to a poor widow's testimony about the mountain man who'd shown her more humanity than an entire town combined. If Jonathan Reeves was going to stand trial again, it would be in the court of public opinion first. And Martha intended to make sure that court heard the truth, even if she had to shout it from every rooftop in Colorado. Outside, snow began falling again, thick and silent, covering tracks and obscuring vision. In his room at the boarding house, Dr. Reeves sat with Lawrence Bennett, dredging up memories he'd tried to bury for 15 years, reconstructing the last weeks of his family's life, searching for the detail that would unlock the mystery of who'd really killed them. And in a telegraph office 200 miles away, a message clicked across the wire, words that would change everything, that would bring Catherine and Lily's real killer out of hiding, that would force secrets into the light no matter how much blood had been spilled to keep them buried. The message read simply, "Reeves found. Send the prosecutor. Time to finish what we started." The game, it seemed, had only just begun. Lawrence Bennett spread photographs across the small table in his boarding house room, each one a window into Jonathan Reeves's former life. Dr. Reeves stared at images he hadn't seen in 15 years. Catherine smiling in their garden, Lily clutching a rag doll, the two of them together on the porch of a house that no longer existed in any meaningful way. "I need you to focus," Bennett said gently, understanding the emotional toll but pressing forward nonetheless. "The weeks before the murders. Walk me through your routine, every detail you can remember." Dr. Reeves tore his gaze from his daughter's face. "I worked 60, sometimes 70 hours a week at Denver General. Catherine hated it, said I was missing Lily growing up. She was right, of course." His voice roughened. "I thought I had time, thought I'd cut back once I made senior surgeon, once we'd saved enough for a bigger house, once. There were always excuses." "What about visitors to your home? Who had keys?" "Catherine's. Sister Margaret had a spare for emergencies. Our housekeeper, Mrs. Gladys Porter, had one, and my colleague at the hospital, Dr. Samuel Whitmore. He'd sometimes stop by if he needed me urgently." Dr. Reeves pressed his palms against his eyes. "The police questioned all of them. Everyone had alibis." Bennett pulled out a worn notebook, flipping to a marked page. "Actually, that's not entirely accurate. Mrs. Porter's alibi was her husband, who claimed she was home all evening. But I tracked down their former neighbor, woman named Ruth Kowalski. She remembers hearing the Porters arguing violently that night, remembers Mrs. Porter leaving the house around 9 o'clock and not returning until well past midnight." Dr. Reeves's head snapped up. "What?" The police said what Detective Frank Morrison told them to say. And Morrison, as I mentioned, was later fired for evidence manipulation. I've spent 2 years piecing together his career, and your case wasn't the first time he'd shaped evidence to fit a preferred narrative." Bennett tapped the notebook. Morrison had a pattern: target the most obvious suspect, usually the spouse, and build a circumstantial case strong enough to pressure a guilty plea. Quick convictions, impressive statistics, promotions. But why target me specifically? I'd never even met Morrison before Catherine's death. Because you were convenient. Grieving husband covered in his family's blood, recent arguments with the wife about work hours, a large life insurance policy. You fit his template perfectly. Bennett pulled out another document. Here's what Morrison buried in his report. Your neighbor, Mrs. Alice Chen, told investigating officers she saw someone leaving your house around the time of the murders. Someone wearing a long coat and hat, moving quickly. Morrison wrote it off as you returning home, even though the timeline doesn't work. You were documented at the hospital until 10:45 that night. Dr. Reeves stood, pacing the confined space like a caged animal. Who was it? Who did Mrs. Chen see? She couldn't identify them. Too dark, too far away. But she was certain. About one detail. The person was carrying something large, wrapped in cloth. Something roughly the size of a painting, Dr. Reeves interrupted, memory flooding back. Catherine had a painting. Small but valuable, inherited from her grandfather. She kept it in the parlor. His eyes widened. It was gone. I noticed it missing when the police were photographing the scene, but they said I must have been mistaken, that grief was affecting my memory. They never listed it as stolen. Bennett smiled grimly, because acknowledging theft would contradict Morrison's narrative that this was a domestic murder, not a robbery. But I found something interesting in the evidence logs. He produced a photocopy of an official document. 3 months after your trial collapsed, that same painting surfaced in a Denver auction house. The auction house recorded the seller as anonymous estate sale, but I traced the consignment paperwork. Want to guess whose signature appears on the intake form? Mrs. Porter? Her husband, actually. Leonard Porter. But that's just the beginning. Bennett laid out more documents. Financial records, property deeds, correspondence. The Porters were drowning in debt. Leonard had gambling problems, owed money to some very unpleasant people, the kind who don't accept excuses. Then suddenly, 3 weeks after your family's murder, they paid off everything. Bought a new house in a better neighborhood. Started living comfortably. Dr. Reeves sank into his chair, the pieces assembling into a picture that was both horrifying and obvious. Mrs. Porter knew our routines. She knew when I'd be at the hospital. She knew about the painting, knew where we kept valuables. His voice dropped to a whisper. She knew Lily would be home that night because Catherine had mentioned canceling their usual dinner with her sister. Exactly. My theory is that Leonard sent Mrs. Porter to steal the painting and whatever else she could grab, quick money to pay his debts. But Catherine came home earlier than expected, caught Mrs. Porter in the act. A struggle ensued. Maybe Mrs. Porter panicked. Maybe things got violent accidentally, but Bennett trailed off, the conclusion too grim to state outright. And Lily. Dr. Reeves's voice broke. My daughter was 6 years old. She couldn't have threatened anyone. Lily was a witness, old enough to identify Mrs. Porter, to tell what she'd seen. I'm sorry, Jonathan. There's no gentle way to say this. Your daughter was murdered to cover up the first crime. The room fell into suffocating silence. Dr. Reeves sat motionless, processing 15 years of anguish, crystallized into brutal truth. His family hadn't died because of who he was or anything he'd done. They died because a housekeeper needed quick money and couldn't afford witnesses. When he finally spoke, his voice was hollow. Do you have proof? Enough to take to authorities? Not yet. The Porters disappeared 8 years ago, sold everything and vanished. I've been tracking them, but they covered their trail well. However, I found something they probably don't know exists. Bennett produced a photograph of a ledger page. This is from the auction house's private records. When they sold your wife's painting, they required identification from the seller. Standard procedure for valuable items. Leonard Porter provided a driver's license, which the auction house photographed for their files, so we know it was him. Better. The photograph shows his full license, including his address at the time, a boarding house on Colfax Avenue. I tracked down the landlord who remembered the Porters well. Very well, in fact, because Mrs. Porter left behind a trunk when they moved out in the middle of the night. The landlord stored it, figuring they'd come back for it eventually. They never did. Dr. Reeves leaned forward intently. What's in the trunk? I don't know. The landlord still has it sealed in his basement. I've been negotiating to examine it, but he's nervous about legal liability. If it contains evidence related to a murder, he could theoretically be charged with obstruction. I need leverage, someone official who can grant immunity or at least assurance he won't be prosecuted. A marshal, Dr. Reeves said. If we could convince one of the federal marshals that there's credible evidence. A sharp knock interrupted them. Both men froze. Bennett moved to the door, pressing his ear against it. Who is it? Eliza Cartwright. Mrs. Brennan sent me with a message. Bennett opened the door cautiously. Eliza slipped inside, breathless and urgent. The marshals are conducting a building-by-building search. They're 3 blocks away, moving systematically. You have maybe an hour before they reach the boarding house. Damn, Bennett muttered. We need more time. Jonathan, you have to leave Coleridge, at least temporarily. No. Dr. Reeves's expression hardened into determination. I'm done running. If we can't get Marshal Davis to look at new evidence through proper channels, then we force his hand. We go public. Public how? Eliza asked. Dr. Reeves stood, a plan forming with the clarity of a surgeon mapping an operation. Bennett, you're a journalist. Write the story, all of it. Morrison's corruption, the Porter's sudden wealth, the painting that was never reported stolen, the witness statements that were ignored. Make it detailed enough that any competent investigator would have questions. And then what? Publish it and hope someone cares about a 15-year-old case? No. We deliver it directly to Marshal Davis along with an ultimatum. Investigate the new evidence properly, or watch me tell this story to every newspaper from Denver to Sacramento. Public pressure will force them to reopen the case, even if they'd prefer to just arrest me quietly. Bennett considered this, then nodded slowly. It's risky. If Davis decides to arrest you anyway, you've lost your leverage. That's why I need insurance. Dr. Reeves turned to Eliza. How many people in Coleridge would testify to my character? People who've seen me help rather than harm? Dozens, Eliza said without hesitation. You saved my sister's life. You gave Mrs. Brennan's son a dignified burial. Yesterday, you set old Mr. Fletcher's broken arm when he fell on the ice. I saw you do it right there in the street, refusing payment. Half the town is starting to question whether the stories about you are true. Then we gather them, everyone who will speak on my behalf. We create a counter-narrative so compelling that arresting me becomes politically complicated. His tactical mind, so long dormant, was fully engaged now. Martha is already writing letters to newspapers. We expand that effort. Testimonials from patients, character witnesses, anyone who can demonstrate that the monster Morrison painted doesn't match reality. A thought struck him. Bennett, in your investigation, did you ever talk to Morrison directly? Tried to. He refused to meet with me, communicated only through lawyers. Very defensive, very hostile to questions about your case specifically, because he knows his investigation was sloppy at best, fraudulent at worst. If we can get him on record, get him to contradict himself, or reveal details that don't match the official narrative. Dr. Reeves smiled without humor. Doctors aren't the only ones who hate being proven wrong. Morrison built his reputation on that case. If it unravels, so does his credibility. Eliza interjected. This is all well and good, but you still have less than an hour before federal marshals knock on this door. What's the immediate plan? We split up, Dr. Reeves decided. Bennett, you start writing. Get the core facts down, enough for a credible article. Eliza, you go back to Martha and anyone else you trust. Tell them to gather at the church tonight, the one that refused to bury Thomas. We're going to force Pastor Wickham to either support truth or publicly align himself with cowardice. Martha, you work on the character witnesses. And you, Bennett asked. I'm going to the marshals myself, voluntarily, before they waste time searching for me. That's insane, Eliza protested. They'll arrest you immediately. Maybe. Or maybe walking in voluntarily, with a journalist and community members as witnesses, makes arresting me complicated enough that Davis will actually listen. Either way, I'm done hiding in rooms while other people fight my battles. Bennett grabbed his coat. If you're doing this, I'm coming with you. You'll need someone documenting everything that happens. They left the boarding house through the front door. No more sneaking through alleys. No more pretending. Dr. Reeves walked through Coleridge's streets in full daylight, his presence drawing stares and whispers, but no open hostility. People he'd helped over the past day nodded respectfully. Others watched with uncertainty, their preconceptions warring with recent evidence. The marshals had established temporary headquarters in Sheriff Portman's office. Dr. Reeves entered without knocking, Bennett close behind. Portman jumped to his feet, hand moving to his sidearm, but Marshal Davis raised a calming hand. Dr. Reeves, I presume, Davis said calmly, saved me the trouble of finding you. I'm here voluntarily, Marshal. I want to make that clear from the start. Dr. Reeves remained standing, using his height to command presence. I also want to present new evidence in my case, evidence that was either ignored or deliberately suppressed 15 years ago. Davis's expression didn't change. That's not how this works. You're a fugitive with an outstanding warrant. My job is to arrest you and transport you back to Denver for trial. Your job is to uphold justice, not just enforce warrants, Dr. Reeves countered. I'm asking for 1 hour. 1 hour to present evidence that will raise reasonable doubt about my guilt. If after hearing it you still want to arrest me, I'll come peacefully. You have my word. The word of a man who fled justice. The word of a father who watched a corrupt detective frame him for his family's murder and knew he'd never survive long enough to prove his innocence through proper channels. Dr. Reeves's voice carried the weight of 15 years' suffering. I'm not asking for freedom, Marshal. I'm asking for the investigation my wife and daughter deserved, but never received. Marshal Cooper, who'd been silent until now, spoke up. What kind of evidence? Dr. Reeves gestured to Bennett, who produced his documentation. Photographs, financial records, witness statements, the chain of evidence connecting the Porters to the stolen painting. He laid it out methodically, each piece building on the last, constructing a narrative that even Davis couldn't immediately dismiss. When Bennett finished, silence dominated the room. Davis studied the documents with an unreadable expression, while Portman fidgeted nervously, clearly uncomfortable with developments that complicated his simple worldview. Finally, Davis spoke. This is compelling, I'll admit, but it's also circumstantial. The Porters being in debt doesn't prove they murdered anyone. Neither did the evidence against me, Dr. Reeves pointed out. Yet that was enough to issue a warrant that's followed me for 15 years. The difference is you had opportunity, and so did Mrs. Porter. She had a key. She knew our schedules. She had a desperate need for money. Dr. Reeves leaned forward, intensity radiating from him. Marshal, I'm not asking you to declare me innocent based on this evidence. I'm asking you to acknowledge it raises questions worthy of investigation. Real investigation, not the sham Morrison conducted. Davis exchanged glances with Cooper, some silent communication passing between them. Cooper gave a slight nod. Here's what I can offer, Davis said carefully. I won't arrest you immediately. You have 48 hours to gather whatever additional evidence exists. But you don't leave my sight during that time. You'll be effectively in custody without bars. I go where you go, see what you see. If at the end of 48 hours I'm not convinced there's merit to reopening the investigation, you surrender peacefully and I transport you to Denver. Agreed, it wasn't freedom, but it was a possibility. Dr. Reeves nodded. Agreed. One condition, Davis added. This journalist writes nothing until the 48 hours are up. I won't have this investigation compromised by press coverage that could spook witnesses or give suspects time to destroy evidence. Bennett started to protest, but Dr. Reeves cut him off. Acceptable. 2 days of silence in exchange for 2 days of actual investigation. Fair trade. They shook on it, an informal agreement that bent regulations but honored the spirit of justice. Portman looked ready to object, but Davis silenced him with a glare. As they left the office, Dr. Reeves finally allowed himself a moment of cautious hope. He had 2 days to prove what he'd known for 15 years, that he was innocent, that his family's real killer had walked free while he hid in the mountains, that justice delayed wasn't necessarily justice denied. 2 days to give Catherine and Lily the truth they deserved. 2 days to reclaim the life that had been stolen from him. The race against time had begun, and failure meant not just arrest, but abandoning the only chance he'd ever have to clear his name and honor his family's memory. But as Martha met them outside the sheriff's office, face set with determination, as Eliza arrived with a growing crowd of people who'd agreed to testify, as Bennett clutched his documentation with journalistic fervor, Dr. Reeves realized he wasn't alone anymore. For the first time in 15 years, he had allies. He had hope. And he had 48 hours to transform both into vindication. The telegram arrived at Denver General Hospital at precisely 9:47 a.m. on the second day of Marshal Davis's investigation. It was addressed to Dr. Samuel Whitmore, Jonathan Reeves's former colleague, the man who'd testified at the aborted trial that Jonathan had seemed distracted and temperamental in the weeks before the murders. The message was simple. Reeves alive, Coleridge, Colorado. Investigation reopening. Respond immediately. Dr. Whitmore read it 3 times. Hands trembling. Then walked directly to the hospital administrator's office and resigned without explanation. By noon, he'd withdrawn his entire savings and purchased a train ticket to San Francisco. By evening, he was gone. Marshal Davis learned of Whitmore's flight within hours, thanks to a contact at the hospital who found the sudden departure suspicious. The timing was too perfect, too panicked. Davis sent an urgent wire to San Francisco authorities requesting Whitmore's detention for questioning. Meanwhile, in Coleridge, Bennett had convinced the Denver boarding house landlord to release the porter trunk. The man arrived personally, nervous but cooperative, once Davis assured him of immunity. They opened it in the church, with Martha, Eliza, and a growing assembly of townspeople as witnesses. Inside, wrapped in moth-eaten cloth, they found Catherine Reeves's stolen painting. Beneath it lay a blood-stained coat, women's size, with Mrs. Porter's initials embroidered inside the collar. And at the bottom, most damning of all, a leather journal containing meticulous records of the Porter's debts, payments, and a chilling entry dated the night of the murders. It's done. God forgive me. Elle says we leave tomorrow. Dr. Reeves stood frozen as Davis read the journal aloud. 15 years of anguish, vindicated in a dead woman's handwriting. Catherine and Lily hadn't died because of him. They died because Gladys Porter needed money and couldn't leave witnesses. The crowd in the church erupted in chaos, some weeping, others shouting, everyone processing the magnitude of injustice, finally corrected. Pastor Wickham, who'd initially resisted allowing his church to be used for this purpose, stood pale and shaken, confronted with his own failure to show mercy when it mattered most. Davis's next move was surgical in its efficiency. He contacted Denver authorities, providing the journal evidence and requesting immediate pursuit of both Porters. He also demanded a full review of Detective Morrison's case files, noting multiple instances of suppressed evidence and witness manipulation. The story broke 3 days later, splashed across newspapers from Colorado to California. Bennett's article, finally published, was damning in its detail, chronicling not just the Porter's crimes, but the systemic failures that had allowed an innocent man to be hunted for 15 years while the real killers prospered. Public outrage was immediate and fierce. Morrison, now retired and living comfortably on his pension, faced calls for criminal prosecution. The Denver Police Department launched an internal investigation, ultimately uncovering 5 other cases where Morrison had similarly manipulated evidence. The Porters were found 4 weeks later in a small Oregon coastal town, living under assumed names. Gladys Porter, confronted with her own journal and the physical evidence, broke down completely. She confessed to everything: the planned theft, the confrontation with Catherine, the moment of panic when Lily appeared. Leonard, facing accessory charges, corroborated her account in exchange for a reduced sentence. Dr. Jonathan Reeves was officially exonerated on March 3, 2020. All charges were dropped, the warrant vacated, his medical license, suspended 15 years earlier, reinstated with full honors. The governor issued a formal apology. Compensation was discussed, though no amount of money could restore what had been stolen, but restoration came in unexpected forms. Dr. Reeves didn't return to Denver. Instead, he established a medical practice in Coleridge, serving the mining families who could rarely afford proper care. Martha Brennan became his unofficial office manager, organizing appointments and ensuring no one was turned away for inability to pay. Eliza Cartwright, inspired by his example, began studying medicine herself, working as his apprentice while preparing for formal training. The cabin on Widow's Peak remained his sanctuary, but it was no longer a hiding place. It became a destination. Patients would make the trek for house calls when weather prevented travel. Families would visit seeking advice, and slowly, impossibly, it transformed from a hermit's isolation into a symbol of redemption. On the first anniversary of Thomas Brennan's death, Martha and Dr. Reeves climbed to Whispering Ridge together. The aspens had leafed out, their leaves trembling silver-green in the mountain wind. Fresh flowers adorned the cairn, placed there by townspeople who'd finally recognized their own cruelty and sought to make amends. "He'd be proud of what you've done," Martha said quietly. Thomas always believed in second chances. Dr. Reeves knelt beside the grave, touching the stones. "I'm grateful to him, to you. If you hadn't climbed that mountain, if you hadn't refused to accept the town's rejection, then we both would have remained buried," Martha finished. "You in your grief, me in mine. Sometimes salvation requires desperation and strangers willing to show mercy." They descended as evening painted the sky in watercolor hues, gold and rose and deepening purple. Below, Coleridge's lights flickered to life, each window a small beacon against gathering darkness. The town that had once turned its back on both of them now depended on Dr. Reeves's skill and wisdom, had learned through shame and consequence that compassion deferred was justice denied. In the years that followed, the story of the poor widow who begged a mountain man to bury her son became legend in Colorado mining country, told not as tragedy, but as testament. Testament to the power of desperate love, the necessity of mercy, the possibility that even the deepest injustice could be corrected by people willing to risk everything for truth. Dr. Jonathan Reeves lived another 32 years, dying peacefully in 2051 at age 79. His funeral was attended by hundreds, former patients, their children, their grandchildren, all people whose lives had been touched by the man who'd returned from exile to build something better than what he'd lost. He was buried on Whispering Ridge, beside the grave of a young man he'd never met, but whose mother had saved him when salvation seemed impossible. The aspens whispered their approval, and the hawks circled overhead, and those who gathered to say goodbye understood they were witnessing not an ending but a completion, the final chapter, of a story that had begun with a widow's desperate plea and a stranger's unexpected mercy. Justice, it turned out, wasn't always swift, but when it finally arrived, carried on the backs of ordinary people doing extraordinary things, it was absolute, and in a small mountain town where winter came early and stayed late, where life was hard and mercy often scarce. The legacy of Martha Brennan and Jonathan Reeves remained, a reminder that sometimes the most profound acts of courage look like simple kindness, and that redemption is always possible for those brave enough to seek it. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.